afternoon. Whether it's good or not probably depends upon how long you stayed inside. So, I'm Chris Nehren, apeiron on IRC, and I work for a firm called OmniTI. I'm a sysadmin for them. So, probably the first thing that we should cover is how many people in the room are, or rather identify as developers, primarily. That's just about what I would expect. System administrators, DevOps, something that I didn't mention already? No? Okay. Okay. Both. Both. Yes, of course. A little bit of both. So this talk is going to be focusing on, from the developer side, of how to make your developer or your admins' lives easier. Because when you're arguing with people, when you're getting into fights and not moving things forward, you're not getting work done. And as professionals, our job is to do stuff. So, you know, we want to be able to get along with one another. And as a system administrator for going on almost a year now, full-time, there are many things that I've learned that developers tend to do that I used to do myself. So I'm putting myself blaming myself for this as well. So some things that we could do to make lives easier. Slides will be on Bitbucket once I make the repo public. All the content is Creative Commons share alike, so do whatever you want with it. So, summary. Work at OmniTI, and some of you might know them as specializing in highly scalable operations. Things like 10,000 requests per second is commonplace for some of our clients. So that kind of thing is a lot more complex, and there are many different ways in which things can fail more creatively, shall we say, than a smaller scale kind of site. So it's more critical to be able to move quickly and do things correctly so that things don't fall over sooner when when you're trying to scale up to high load. And so this is actually part one half of a series of talks that I want to give, the other one being on admins helping devs. So I'm not just trying to single out the devs, I'm going to be telling my admin colleagues how to be better too. So, right. Now, another thing that is part of this is that I think full stack generalists are the key to moving forward for scalable operations. And what I mean by a full stack generalist is someone who can go up and down the full software stack to be able to solve any kind of problem that you could have. And I can think of 3 examples off the top of my head within the last few months where the problem was at a kernel driver level impacting production. And we have graphs that actually show this data very, very visually. So we have evidence that, it is actually the kernel driver. We're not just making stuff up. So being able to go up and down from your app that your users are interacting with to all the way down to something you would pass off to your sysadmin, if you don't have the competence to really do all of that, then you're going to hit roadblocks and you're going to not be able to solve your problems as quickly. Now, I'm not saying you need to know everything, because of course as things get more complex, it's harder to know everything. But there is a drive towards being more competent and being more knowledgeable, at least if not able to debug a kernel driver issue, because I can't do that right now, although I know where to go to begin doing that kind of thing. So it's more a perspective of what needs to be done and thinking about the problems, opening your mind to different ways of looking at problems if it's not just a bug in your app. If you're doing really highly scalable things, you might be hitting the upper limit on the TCP states in your OpenBSD-PF firewall. You might be exposing a bug in the checksumming for your Intel E1000G NIC. Just 2 examples off the top of my head. So also, another thing that is pretty critical as we're going to be doing highly scalable apps is to make sure that the business metrics are also very visible to the people who care about those, because generally they're going to be the ones who give you a budget, i.e. a paycheck. So you might want to make those people happy. Right, so you might have gotten something of an indication that I'll be talking about DevOps today. And while I did not envision this talk originally as being a DevOps talk, you could kind of call it that, in that DevOps is a cultural movement which is centered on bringing developers and operations together. So you could call this a DevOps talk in that sense, but you don't really have to do DevOps as a thing, whatever that thing may be, to put into practice some of the things that I'll be suggesting today. Right, so. And of course, quick summary, yes?
We really can't hear you very well back here.
One sec. Is this any better?
Oh, yes.
I'll just speak up, I'm sorry. Okay, so, right. Just, summary of what we're going to be covering today. Some social skills to make everyone's lives easier. This is some sorts of things that in the very rushed nature of development that tend to be skipped, but that I, as a system administrator at 3 a.m. in the morning, am frustrated about, let's say, when they don't happen. So these are some things that I would appreciate as an administrator just having around. They're very simple sorts of things. They're not very complicated. And there are some technical things that we can go over as well. Now, I'm going to be mentioning a few specific technologies. These are not endorsements. These are just examples of what works for us, how we do things, what works for what I've been doing. And some of them are singular implementations in that there aren't any real other alternatives. So if you're going to be doing something I'm suggesting, you will be using this tool, likely. But as is the nature of open source, that will be changing as things move on. So feel free to disregard the specifics, and the concepts of what tools do is important. So what do tech people do? I guess we should start there to identify how we can do things better. We are builders, we are enablers, we're translators of technology into things that people can use, and we're interfaces, and we have eyes that burn. Okay, all right, so what I mean by all of this is we're builders. We make things, right? We put things together, we make things, we assemble stuff from parts. And beyond this, we are enablers. And what I mean by enablers is that someone who doesn't have computer skills will come to us, whether that's a client or a customer or someone in your organization, and will say, I want to do X for whatever value of X. And so they don't have the computer skills to really be able to do X on their own. Well, okay, that's fine. We're technical people, and it's our job to do X for them or to enable them to do X. And we're also translators. And what I mean by translators is that we take their non-technical requirements and translate that into tech, which is very basic overview of the development process. But also interfaces. And what I mean by interfaces is that with all of our systems that we're putting together and building and so on and so forth, the business people, if they don't know the Unix shell or whatever, they're going to need some kind of help to get some insight into the nature of their systems and how they're working. So we don't have to sit and answer all their questions all day. We have tools to make that easier, but we need to build those tools, and as such, we are the interface. So, and let's start with the social skills. Not sure if you can see that, but there's supposed to be a cat there. So you have to have a cat on the slide about memes. You just have to. So, and a stapler. You need a red stapler. So, right. Now, of course, as there's 40, 50 people in this room, reasonably full, it is evident from at least this perspective that humans are very social creatures. And so, it is a very common cliche but the ability to communicate is very, very, very critical. And there are a number of different communication methods that you can do in a technical environment, and I'll be going over a few of them that make my life much easier. And if my life is easier, I'm happy. And you want me to be happy, right? So good. Okay, so one thing that I do want to point out is a rather favorite quote of mine from Damien Conway. This is an excerpt of a quote. It is, "Documentation is a love letter." And what I mean by that is that it's something that you put together that is going to be consumed at a later date, which, yes, it's generally how it works. And it's not only that you're putting it together to make your life easier, but you're putting it together to facilitate everyone else doing their job. And keeping people happy, making sure they can do what they want to do, enabling them to succeed. That sounds like love to me. So documentation is a love letter. And it's not just what you write in the wiki or in your markdown docs or in your source code. It's all application output is documentation. And this, if you're thinking about log output or stuff your app puts to standard out, standard error, whatever, that's documentation that happens at runtime. And of course, don't forget the simple emails, phone calls, the traditional things, that kind of thing. So now it might be a little confusing, what you want to communicate short of everything, because saying everything does not really help very much. So one of the things that is, pretty critical from my point of view is that I would like to see operations departments involved from the beginning of an application lifecycle. That means requirements, design, implementation, maintenance. All planning needs to involve ops. Ops meaning operations or admins. And obviously, operations people need to know about operational changes. I mean, not necessarily every code change. You don't really need to know those kinds of things because you're not a developer. But you need to know, we need to know what is going on high level, at least, for your application so that we know what to expect when we get high load at peak time, whatever peak time is for your app, or some other vagary of how it performs. We need to understand how it's changed to be able to expect or be surprised at some kind of behavior. So being able to let us know when you're changing things, it sounds simple, but at least one client of ours doesn't do this, and it makes me very, very, very frustrated. So, right, so of course, some people might be wondering, why involve operations from the beginning if operations is just going to deploy the application and make sure it runs? So, generally in most firms that I know of, the operations team is responsible for the capacity planning for the hardware that's going to be deployed on. So the operations department will get a budget to spend on hardware for deploying your application. So if you know that your application is going to need 16 gigs of RAM, or 100 or 200 or whatever, or some other hardware requirements, then it's important to get that out as soon as you can so that the budgets can be made and so that there's no surprises to the CFO. If there's surprises to the CFO, you don't get a bonus. So you want a bonus, right? So get that information in soon. Right, and also beyond that, once you've actually got the hardware provisioned, the operations team is generally responsible for doing maintenance planning. What I mean by maintenance planning is things like upgrading the application or provisioning larger disks or that kind of thing. So if we know the usage profile of your app in terms of its resources, then we can better anticipate when we're going to run out of disk, when we're going to need more memory, what kind of CPU we can expect this thing to use, and so on. And of course, the very traditional sort of view of system administration is that the operations people will be responsible for keeping the app running. The very traditional, stereotypical view is the system getting a call at 3 a.m. in the morning. So this is, of course, what we usually are known for doing, and it goes without saying that we should be able to understand how things are going to behave so we can actually do this intelligently. And of course, also, obviously, the operations team knows the production environment. How many devs here don't really have access to their production environments? not as few hands as well, yeah, I'm going to disagree with you. It was not as many hands as I was expecting, which is, if it's done well, can be a good thing. So in a traditional environment, it is the operations people who have access to production and will be pushing things there. So if you're a developer and you don't know production, then, well, it should be very obvious that you need to communicate what production needs to be so the admins can make sure that it fits your expectations. Seems pretty obvious, but bears mentioning anyway. So, lifecycle. What I mean by lifecycle is the upgrading and maintenance of the application, in addition to the development lifecycle. So it's full project, really. So also, of course, it's all about the communication, and hopefully, things will be clearer about why it's important. So, of course, if you let the operations team know what's going on, then their confusion with things changing will be reduced, which means they'll be happier. Communication enables better responses to situations. So if something changes and it causes downtime of some sort, then if we know that something's going to happen, or we know the situation, then we can react more intelligently, more rapidly, which means more money, which means a bonus. Right. So also, communication, as I mentioned a little earlier, helps with projecting performance and costs. So if you have an app that's using a gigabyte per month for data of whatever sort, say a database is growing that fast, you are able to determine if you let it go without doing anything, you will need to buy a new disk or ship data off at this time, which is good for not only the CFO, but also whoever's in charge of your products, so you know when to schedule downtime or maintenance of that sort. And of course, when you're not communicating, generally people tend to have a lower morale because they feel left in the dark, they feel like they don't have a sense of agency, they feel like they don't have any input into what's going on. So if you're communicating, then people will feel involved, and if they feel involved, generally they'll feel a lot better. Is there anyone here who doesn't feel better when they're involved in something that they're responsible for? Really?
Politics.
That's not what we're talking about, but touche. Okay, so of course, what is it that ops actually does? The very traditional sense. Well, we keep the app running, but what does that really mean? What do I do when I keep the Jira running, or the app server running, or the load balancer? It's deploying it, which is installing the app, and especially in a Perl world, all of its dependencies. All of its dependencies. Oh, the dependencies. As we move towards more dynamic languages like Perl, Python, Ruby, JavaScript, etc., with a lot of reusable libraries, the dependencies is especially something that needs to be communicated early as possible. And as updates come in, we need to know, what's going on, so that we don't upgrade your JSON to version 2 and break all your code, or we don't upgrade your www mechanize and break all your code. If you were here earlier today. So, and beyond just making sure the app can run, this involves actually starting the app, gasp, which can happen in any number of ways. I mean, this is Perl, so there's 6,000 different ways to do it. But beyond even the Perl methods, there are things at the operating system level, like Upstart, and there are other things like daemon tools and SMF and so on and so forth. I can go on and on and on about all that. So having something standardized across all of your applications makes it simpler. And simpler is easier to understand and leads to better maintenance, lower maintenance costs, which again, bonus. So, or whatever other motivator you have. So, and of course, there's monitoring and maintenance, which is things that are typically what you would have your admin doing. But I really do seriously believe that a dev will know at least some metrics about an application's performance that will be useful to monitor. Say this application is supposed to be getting 10,000 requests per second. If it's not something might be wrong. Either the network is down going to it, or it's not as busy as it should be for some reason, and that's separate from the simple "is it up" metric. I work for a firm that does a monitoring system, and they have shirts that say, "Just because it's up doesn't mean it's working." So, and beyond even the "is it up," "is it working," even more importantly than that is it making money? If you're in a situation where you're making money, or whatever other business metrics you have, the monitoring needs to take care of those. So if you are aware of business metrics, which you should be as you're delivering a product to a customer, it's important to make sure that those are communicated to the admin team so they can get those up. And maintenance, this is upgrading, which is what I talked about a little bit before, making sure you don't upgrade your JSON, break your code, or whatever, something like that kind of thing. And also making sure the app is up and running and doing hardware upgrades, that kind of thing. It's sort of obvious, but it's the traditional thing. So, and of course, if you're going to be writing documentation about all of this, maybe your employer isn't going to need you once you write it, right? No. Lots of managers love people who do docs. Lots of managers love people who do docs. My manager tells me he's very happy whenever I do documentation. Just, Has anyone ever actually been admonished for writing documentation? No, I didn't think so. So there you go. You have evidence, empirical.
You need bonuses for writing docs.
I love you. Okay, so no one's actually been admonished for writing docs. So obviously, it's a good thing that there needs to be more of. As said before, good documentation is a love letter to people who read it. So the reaction isn't to replace, but as was just said, rather to reward people who write documentation, because people who write documentation are enablers. They accelerate the team. They make things better for everyone around them. So need more documentation. And I have some thoughts on doing documentation that I've learned from open source projects, and I can tell you more about those after the talk. And of course, good docs, if I don't need to page you at 3 in the morning, which I will, which I have, it makes me love you. So it's all about the love. Right, so of course, what to document. There's the, very, very simple stuff. Now, I mentioned the simple stuff because I've been in situations where it's been entirely absent. So I'm going to just give benefit of the doubt and say maybe people don't know to document this. Maybe they think it's obvious because it's obvious to them or whatever. So, basic stuff like how do I install this? How do I deploy this? If the admin is not going to be responsible for doing this, a lot of devs here raise their hands for access to production. Okay, so if you're going to have access to production, presumably you have that to install your app. Fine, okay, that's cool. I just want to make sure that I know if I need to roll out a new app, or roll out a new server, or the disk failed and I need to deploy the app somehow. I need to know how to actually do that, which could be git checkouts or cpanm or packages, so on and so forth. How to start and stop it, which could be, any of the other methods I described before. Most importantly, so far, where it puts its logs. It is logging, right? Somehow?
So logs will grow.
Yes, getting to that. So, yes, as was mentioned, the logs will grow. So calculate into your resource planning the overhead your logs will have on disk in terms of retention and rotation. Because very few things are more annoying than getting paged at 3 in the morning about a full disk for logs. Now, getting spammed to the on-call address is worse, but only a little. So,
but as a sysadmin, you don't know if you can delete that log. You don't know if it's valuable to anyone or not. That's the worst thing at 3 o'clock in the morning.
If it was properly documented, I would know. So, also, in addition to logs, I would like to know what kind of problems this application has. Does it sometimes get bad data that you haven't had a chance to fix yet? Maybe you get bad email addresses or something because email has a living. Maybe you get garbage from a vendor, or rather, maybe you get garbage from a vendor whose service you're using. Maybe they didn't implement all their API and they say they did and they lied to you because vendors are evil. You know, that kind of thing. And it helps to have standard operating procedures, i.e. a checklist of things that you can go through for solving problems. And standard operating procedures, or SOPs, are something that OmniTI is rolling out recently, stolen from Ben Rockwood. And I would love to talk more about this after the talk, but there's so much more stuff. Right. Install, deploy docs. You know, basic sort of stuff. Miyagawa, a few years ago at YAPC, I think maybe it was Asheville, talked about how to deploy a Plaque app. And I think he spent about an hour not giving a specific suggestion. He was very polite and equivocal in terms of covering all the options. But from a sysadmin perspective, I want something definitive. It needs Nginx version 1.28, specifically 1.28, not the 1.43 that was just released. You need to install it with cPanM using this mirror, so on and so forth. And as I said earlier, you know, dependencies are a big deal. Has anyone ever actually written a script in production that does not use a module? I didn't think so. So there you go. Dependencies are the nature of Perl. And it's not even just the modules, but it's the database, the firewall, the disk, the network, and so on and so forth. Everything that your app needs, from operating system to the code itself. We need to know that so that we can get things out and moving. And there are some environment particulars. Say, I'm not sure how many people here are in an environment where admins are doing some stuff in either dev or a staging environment, but at least one of our clients, I will sometimes need to go into a dev environment to fix things or to deploy something. So knowing any of the particulars about that kind of environment, I mean, it's something as a developer, possibly by definition, you work with every day. So you're familiar with it. Okay, great. I would hope you would be. But an admin who's juggling prod and dev and staging and provisioning and so on may not have that expertise. So being able to know what kind of particulars there are for an environment. Like say, let's not drop the prod database from a test framework. Hi, GitHub. And of course, as with pretty much everything, having config management details for all of your environments makes my life easier, makes your life easier. So config management, all the things. It doesn't matter if you're using Chef or Puppet or Ansible or Salt or whatever. It just matters that, you know, things can be and all are automated. And moving on to, again, logs, seems to be a common topic. I would love to see logs for previous deploys. They're text files, they're very simple, they're very small, they compress well, disk is dirt cheap. I've seen SSDs for less than $1 a gigabyte. You have no excuse. You really have no excuse right now for...
I don't know our purchasing department.
Touche.
Buy a USB drive, really.
Yep. SmartOS runs off of a USB, so you can put your logs there. So anyway, logs for previous deploys, so we know what happened, if anything failed. Maybe you're deploying something over the network and your deployment tool will drop files if there is a network problem. My boss was in that situation. It happens. So being able to have logs for stuff that's dropped on the floor or that breaks otherwise would have saved my boss, in this case, a lot of time. So being able to have that kind of thing, to look at it, will give you more information, and information and knowledge is power, so G.I. Joe and all that. Right, so start and stop maintenance. There's, many different ways to do this, independent of the Perl options. There's, SMF, which is a Illumos Solaris kind of thing. There's Runit, which is, the sort of more sane daemon tools. There's daemon tools. There's plain init script, which isn't so plain. If anyone has ever actually used more than one Unix system, they're not so plain and they're not so standard. Yeah, so, sorry? Right. So, there's also daemon control, which is a Perl thing, which it's okay. I mean, if I can't have SMF, I would like to have daemon tools, or excuse me, not daemon tools. I would like to have daemon control because it's simple and consistent across all of Perl. I would recommend you take a look at it on CPAN. It is written by someone who has a clue. Right. So also, I need to know where this tooling is to actually start the application. So tell me where it is so I can start it. Seems obvious, but you'd be surprised. Does it need to run as a specific user? Does it have any specific environment variables that it needs? Does it need any configuration files? Does it need any ports open? So on and so forth. Everything you need to know to run the app, I need to know that for the StartStop Minutes. And of course, dependencies as usual. It's a common theme. So back to logs. All about logs. Make sure your app does write logs, please. I'll be sad. You don't want me to be sad, right? So tell me, where the logs are. Make sure that we know what is logged and what isn't. More what isn't than what is. Because if I'm looking for something in the logs and I don't know that it's not supposed to be there, I'm going to be spending an awful lot of time looking for it, expecting to find it. And if I don't find it, I'm going to panic. If I'm going to panic, you get the phone call. So let me know, what is logged. And as I said before, retention and space requirements for rotation. Now, this is not just something that applies to disk space, but in question in the back?
Oh, no.
Okay. This also applies to regulatory environments, such as PCI or other standards-based environments where you need to have data available for a certain amount of time, and you need to cull it after a certain amount of time. So communicating that to us, we can provision disks properly and make sure that we're not rotating your logs too soon, so we get fined with a PCI audit violation or something like that, is useful. So, okay, all of this, general communication. If you do deploys, please tell us, at least the on-call person, so they know what's happening. So when the service flaps and Nagios or whatever you're using says it goes down, they don't freak out too much. Keep people informed, about what changes. There was an article in Communications of the ACM recently where the writer wrote about the software process for the space shuttle. They did things in a very waterfall fashion. All the requirements up front, requirements finished before design, design finished before implementation, and you're thinking, oh, well, wow, that would be nice if we could do that, but we're agile. Yeah, no, they had over 2,000 changes over 6 years to their requirements. They just kept updating it as they were going. So it's not traditional waterfall. They did react to changes. And it doesn't matter which methodology you're using. It doesn't matter, what you're doing, how you're doing it. We need to know, things change. Because if we don't know that things change, like mechanized, for example, from earlier today, you're going to have your code broken. And it won't be our fault, it won't be your fault, it will be the process's fault. So, let us know what's going on. Don't keep things to yourself. Just don't communicate too much. Because how many people here get too much email? Yeah, look around. And that's too much email that you're going to look at it, mark it as read without reading it. If it's critical, your boss comes to you and says, did you read that? I must have. I marked it as read. Oops. So there you go. Something that I'm pushing at work myself is to lower the email, but it's slow. So don't overdo it, or else you'll be in a situation where you have filters to mark stuff as read. Not that I do that. Nope. Right. So getting back to the importance of logging, not just where to put it. It is documentation of the current status of your application. It is documentation of the current health of the application, of what it's doing. And as we'll get to later, good postmortems really depend on all kinds of logs from everything involved. And in some cases, like the kernel bugs that I was talking about before, this can go to the level of a kernel crash dump. So I'm not really saying, that I expect you to be able to debug a kernel crash dump, but being able to have all of that information available is very useful. And if documentation is a love letter, then similarly, the logs are a pulse that come also right from the heart. And what I mean by this is that logs tell you the health of the application, what it's doing, what it's thinking, how it's moving from one state to another. So having that kind of information, just don't overdo it, is really, really important. I cannot say how many times good logs really helped me to quickly identify what's happening. I mean, a good error message even, would be really, really useful. Can't locate foo.pm in at inc. That tells you everything you need to know. It doesn't really communicate much to someone who doesn't know Perl, but as I'll be lightning talking about later today, people should be polyglotts. Maybe not today, but either way. So yes, logging is love letter. Right, so as for doing the postmortems, as I just said, the first rule of postmortems is don't assign blame. The second rule of postmortems is don't assign blame. The third rule is don't mention the word blame. And when you do that, it becomes not an ego thing, it becomes a technical engineering process, which is where we need to be to actually address the problems that we have. So one thing that I've read that I've tried to do to some success is keep asking why until you get to a root cause. Say, for example, the web server went down. Well, why? The disks filled. Why? Logs. Why? No rotation. Why? We forgot, or whatever. So, document everything you find, including, steps taken to prevent recurrence. And going back to the space shuttle program that I talked about a little earlier, the way they did postmortems and other sort of troubleshooting was not to blame the people, but rather to blame the process. The process is what allowed the problem to happen in the first place. And if you fix your process, then human error will decrease because it won't be possible in the process for that kind of human error to crop up. So if you can, fix your process and prevent things from happening again, which is going back to the GitHub example, I like to pick on them, but they do postmortems very well, and they did a good job of preventing what their screw up from happening again. So I have to give them respect in that regard. So, make the logs for postmortems easily found and searchable. So, yes. So far, so good. So far, so good. Any questions on social aspects? Yes? No? No? Okay. All right. Unfortunately, you can't see it very well, but that is an old school Sun pizza box, of course.
Is there a cat on top of it?
Unfortunately, no. No.
Just say there is.
It's a quote from the monastery. There's not going to be a cat there.
Ah.
Yes. Sorry?
B210?
I'm not sure. Not sure. There's a link to the Flickr page with the photo in the slide, so you can go there if you want. Right. So, as I alluded to earlier, there are some specific technologies that will make things a lot easier for us and for you, really, because it's all about being able to be moving quickly, responding quickly to demands from your clients, from your customers, and from your business people. So technology helps with technology problems, obviously. One would hope. So, a lot of these are examples of ideas. And what I mean by examples of ideas is that they are specific implementations, things that I'm familiar with, things that I have used well, but I'm not really endorsing them in most cases. Just, find something that works for you, as with everything else. Don't just pick something because I talked about it. Don't just pick something because it's popular. Pick something because you can evaluate it in a technical, logical way to prove that it is good for your environment. pick the best tool for the job. Unix philosophy for the win. This won't be a how-to for the technologies that I'm going to be talking about. There are docs for that, and some of them there are talks later at this conference for the text that I'm going to be talking about, and I will be pointing those out. So, go see the talks, read the documentation. If you have questions, there are communities for all of these things to help you out. So don't feel that you need to figure it out all on your own. Oops. See, if I was introspective, I would have fixed that. Right, so...
You mean introspection.
Sorry?
You mean introspection if you're introspection.
Yes. Yes. Right, so... is there anyone here who knows what the term telemetry is in terms of an application? No. No, okay. So telemetry in terms of an application is a lot of what I've already said, basically, which is how it's performing, what it's doing, what the metrics are for its performance, what's going wrong. It's generally the idea of applying telemetry from an aircraft to a software program. They can both crash. So, it's really, really very basic stuff for how the application is, what it's doing. And it's really, really critical to have this kind of thing both from an admin perspective, from a developer's perspective, and from a business person's perspective. There is very little real metrics available, very little concentration on business metrics for applications, something that I think really needs to change. So, something I hammer on a lot. And there are some tools for introspection, of course, like StatsD. Andrew Hobbs-Rodland is doing a talk, I think Wednesday, on this. And StatsD is really very simple. It's essentially a little oversimplifying. It's a key value sort of streaming system for doing counters and that kind of thing, counters and metrics for your application. You just fire stuff off to a server and it reads it in and does stuff with it. I think the official canonical implementation is for Graphite, right? But you can read it in from a bunch of other things, including Logstash, which is wonderful. So dtrace is another tool that if you can use it, you will. It is sort of like seeing all the pieces fall together in Tetris, forming 4-line Tetrises all the time. You can basically go from everything from app-level logic to right above the electrons moving in your hardware with dtrace in production without performance penalties. It is a godsend. I love it. If you can use it, do so. Linux alternative is SystemTap. If you're looking to really dig into what your system is doing on a Linux environment, if you're not doing Illumos or Solaris or BSD or OS X, you have SystemTap on Linux if you want to do that. Mark Allen is going to be giving a lovely talk tomorrow, I think, on dtrace, and I heartily recommend you go, if not only to learn about what it is, because it really changes how you think about system introspection. And then there's monitoring tools like Circonus, which is what my employer develops, Nagios, Xenos, Zabbix, etc., etc. There's 12 dozen of these, and it's not really important to.
Gross.
Yes, and it's not really important which application you're using, rather than that you're actually having monitoring. So just pick something that works for you and go with it. And then there are more hackish, you could say, sorts of ways of doing something, like a control socket for Unix or the Apache scoreboard, that kind of thing. So it doesn't really matter, what tools you're using, so long as they work for what kind of information you want to get out of your application. So StatsD. It is, project by Etsy. They do craft stuff, and their office is amazing if you ever get a chance to go. It is a language-independent means of counters and timing information. So you just fire stuff off to a server, and by default it goes to Graphite, but you don't have to do Graphite. It's very lightweight and simple. See Andrew's talk for more. He is awesome. dtrace, it is wonderful. And I said before that it goes from your application to your hardware. So dtrace itself is on its own. It's meant for syscall, C library, lower level stuff in your application. But there is a project by Chris Allen, libusdt, which allows you to write probes in Perl. Mark will probably be talking about that. If not, I will be asking him. As I said, systemtap for Linux. I don't think there's a USDT equivalent for systemtap. Not sure. It's less mature. It's not as old. Monitoring packages. Yes. So, it doesn't really matter what the tooling is. Helps to know what to monitor, which requires a communication that I described earlier. If everyone is in a room saying these stats are important for my application, then you know from the beginning what you need to monitor. Which, if you have bad monitoring, it's worse than none, because it gives you a false sense of security that everything is fine when things could be on fire. LP0 on fire, yeah. Right, so, and more importantly than this, even is that if you have a monitoring system, you need to make sure the alerts go to the right people. I've more than once gotten an alert that was for maybe a dev environment or something that I wasn't able to fix for whatever reason. That alert is worse than useless because it wastes my time. It wastes the time of the person who's supposed to be fixing it. It wastes the time of the person who set it up, and so on and so forth, in addition to not actually solving the problem. So monitoring is such an enormous topic. It actually has its own conference these days. It is such an enormous topic, and I could go on at length all day about monitoring. Find me in the hallway if you want to talk about it. So, what metrics to make available? As I said before, business metrics. I can't give you advice here. Every app has its own business requirements. I cannot really say you should be monitoring this because this may not apply to you. So talk to your business people, ask them what's important in their application so they know that it's working well. General application health, I've gone over this. Performance telemetry, as I said before. Trend, whatever is important, which I've mentioned before. So have graphs for knowing how much disk you're using, how much network you're using over time, so you can react more intelligently, so you can project what's going on. And with all this information that you're pulling in, you might be thinking, well, gee, Chris, it's nice that you're telling me to collect all this data, but what am I going to do with it all? How am I going to use it? So there's this wonderful guy, Jordan Sizzle, and he created something called Logstash, which is an evolution of syslog, I like to say. And what I mean by that is that it takes an input from any protocol you can care to mention, and it has filters and it outputs. That's all it does. It is very simple, very Unixy, and I cannot recommend Logstash enough. It will you can basically centralize all your logs from your entire organization in Logstash and make them searchable, which is what we're working towards for OmniTI. It is very extensible. It's written in JRuby, which Ruby's not so bad. You can stone me now. I will say, though, that it is still growing up, and there is a data schema change coming soon. However, there will be tooling to move your data forward if you get deep into Logstash before the schema change happens. Yes?
How does that compare to syslog-ng?
Log-ng.
Syslog-ng.
Oh, syslog-ng. Does syslog-ng do things like read from AMQP?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Does it do HTTP, JSON filtering, so on and so forth?
Yes.
Interesting. Interesting. I haven't really looked very much at it, but thank you. That will go in the next edition of the talk. Thank you. As I said, Logstash is still growing up. It is a very rapidly moving project, so keep that in mind when you look to adopt it. What about keeping the app running? Making sure that there are different ways to make sure that the application is running. There are, you can steal the SIGINFO trick from BSD, where you send a signal to the application and it prints out some telemetry information like CPU usage and the syscall that it's in presently. to a log file, that kind of thing might be useful. Start and restart management, which goes back to the tooling we were talking about before. Cluster management, like load balancers and Linux high availability and the Solaris high availability, those kind of things are pretty important. So talk to your sysadmin about this kind of thing. That's generally where they're going to be. Right, signal management, as I said, SIGINFO is useful, and something I want to hit upon is the importance to, if you're in a Unix environment, the importance, I can see, what I'm talking about, the importance to distinguish between sigterm and sigkill. Term is politely saying, please clean up, I'm about to end you. Kill is obvious. Kill should be obvious. So if you're wondering how this works, most Unix operating systems have in its scripts that send term, wait a little bit, then send kill. The idea being to give the application a chance to clean up after itself, close its log files, so data gets flushed, close its other data files, so stuff gets flushed, and not exit in an inconsistent state. Kill is very abrupt. It's kill. It's what it says on the tin. So make sure that your application, if you're going to be using these Unix signals, make sure that you handle them correctly. Any Unix sysadmin will be able to give you a lecture on what the signals are and how you should be using them and how you're doing it wrong. So, yes, getting the bits in place. I mentioned most of this already. There's many different ways to do it. Git, cpnm, Jenkins, da 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 da. I have opinions. All the other admins in this room have opinions. They will not be the same. That's okay. Listen to what your admin says. It's just important, to reach some kind of agreement and be consistent. Because if your applications are deployed 6 different ways, that's 12 different ways that it will break. So, simple communication, consensus. And yes, lots of tools for starting and stopping applications. Things like daemon tools, SMF, runit, daemon control, upstart. Again, consistent. Your admin will have suggestions on it. And I'm mentioning these tools so that you can be familiar with them, so that you can learn how they work in case you need to do whatever with them, so that you know that they exist, so that you know how they work, what kind of expectations they have for your applications, so you can build them intelligently based on the assumptions they make. There's also things like cluster management, and there's different tools for that, like Linux high availability, Apache traffic server, dedicated load balancers. I like Zeus because the scripting language is rather like Perl, so I'm a little biased. There are dedicated tools for this. Again, consistency. I'm consistent about consistency, if nothing else. And yes, so that's pretty much everything. So any questions on what I've covered? I've covered a lot of stuff very quickly. So any questions or comments or concerns or tomatoes or troll faces or stone silence? Okay. Okay, yes, in the back.
Are these slides available online?
Question was, are the slides available online? And they will be 5 minutes after I disconnect my computer to push them up and to make the repo public. Any other questions, comments, concerns? No? Yes?
I will actually offer a suggestion. You're saying, talking about communicating between before deployment processes and et cetera. Allow me to recommend the book, The Checklist Manifesto. I forget who the author's name is, but it's develops from the tools used in surgeons and high-powered hospitals and flight engineers for airports and stuff.
The Control Masters Manifesto?
The checklist.
Checklist.
Manifesto.
Checklist Manifesto. I'm not sure where I got Control Master from. I'm doing too much SSH.
Is the author.
Okay, so Checklist Manifesto by Atul
Gawande, G-A-W-A-N.
Gawande. Okay.
Google it. It's
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Several all at once. I think yours went up first.
Yeah, if you're looking for a GPL project or centralized log management, I have a Perl-based project I presented on last year called Elsa. So for you to check that out, it uses syslog ng, ramps and full text search.
Elsa for a GPL log stash alike, you said?
Yeah.
And the question over here.
Oh, what's the nicest way to talk to an admin to keep them, or to have them read all that nice documentation rather than calling the dev department.
So let me make sure I understand.
Chocolates usually work.
Let me make sure I understand the question and repeat it. You're asking how to ensure the developers actually read the documentation?
No,
Or maybe the admins, rather.
Right. Or they go through the documentation before they fill out a problem ticket to send it to dev.
That is more a cultural problem, and really it comes down to they should be more professional than that. So if they care about their job, they should know this kind of thing, and they should read the documentation anyway.
Your talk, I don't think it's very nice to just get up and walk out of the speaker, so thank you. You did a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.